Dr. Nadav Berman. Dr. Nadav Berman is a postdoctoral fellow of the Kreitman Fellow at the Goldstein-Gorin Department of Jewish Thought at Ben-Gurion University of the Negev, where he works, advised by Professor Daniel Lasker, on Jewish thought vis-a-vis pragmatism and agape, two things that don't always go together, or someone would think, but. And Nadav is also a research fellow at the University of Haifa's Law Faculty, where he collaborates with Professor Tal Zarsky. Tal and Nadav recently received a grant from the Israel Science Foundation, and we know that those are not easy to get, for their collaborative research on the concept of code between law, technology, and Jewish thought. And their joint article, What is the Juxtaposition Between Silicon Valley and Mount Sinai, Covenantal Principles and the Conceptualization of Platform User Relations, is forthcoming in the Journal of Law and Religion. Nadav has spent extensive time at Yale, pursuing his research on philosophy and pragmatism, and we're delighted to hear from him now. So please.
Okay, shalom, everyone. I think we have three options. The first is extending the time framework in some technological way. Maybe it's possible. The second is that I'll read the paper in its entirety. And the third is that I'll give you an abstract. Lori was speaking on Amalek, so I can do Amalek, not with Ain, but with Aleph. So I will Amalek to you my paper. And anyhow, the goal was...
we'd like to sort of basically stay on track for finishing by 7, but if we have little playing joints, so,
isn't it 4:30? Okay. Thank you, Yehuda. And I'll speak fast. In English, it might not end up successfully, but I can try. I'm a kibbutznik like Chava, but she spent much more time in the US, so I'll do my best. Is it okay? Yeah. So thank you again, Yehuda, for this kind warm introduction, to you, Chanoch, to the two of you for organizing this future-oriented mini-conference. I personally believe that Jewish philosophy indeed has something to say about the future. As usual, in Jewish thought, there are many interesting responses to such questions, and they are often contradictory, as we saw between Chav and Moed, for example, interesting dialectics and perhaps even disputes. But I do think that within the wealth of voices in Jewish thought, there is a certain center of mass or axiological gravity. Not, as you know, 70 panim LaTorah, but not endless faces. So, in the present digital age, humanity faces various challenges, including issues concerning the normative and legal boundaries of technology usage, artificial intelligence. I'm no expert of AI. This is why we have Moed here. But I am thinking about that from the angle of Jewish thought. So such questions involve AI, robotics. Ethicists intensively discuss various tech ethical issues such as privacy protection, freedom of speech vis-a-vis shaming, autonomous weapon systems, or production technologies, and more. This paper focuses on the presumed right for cognitive or mental privacy, facing the increased capacity of AI-based subjectivity, invasive technological means. For the written version of the paper, it's efficient to call it SITM, but never mind, I won't use this phrase too much. But such means for trying to detect what we are actually thinking of are becoming increasingly used, as Chava was saying, and it includes security cameras, one example of demonstration of such technology, facial recognition, AI-based, detection of hostile emotional moods, and so on. And the fruits of such mining of data can be called psyche-situated data, but again, no need to use this technical term. We have what's going inside the box between the ears and how technological means can be used to dig or to mine it. So the separation between the public and the private realm thus increasingly erodes. In the last decade, technological capabilities of AI-assisted data gathering of mental content or thoughts of persons advanced unprecedentedly. A public intellectual who does tackle the topic, Yuval Noah Harari, I mentioned before, warns from the technological disruption that might occur, and he calls it dataism, or I call it hadata, paraphrasing the hadata with stuff, so hadata with that. And indeed, there are religious ideas here, right? That is not so favorable for the Bible, for example, right? It's for Hashverosh, and the religious career of the terms, I think, is very important, and this is part of what I aim to suggest here. So what should be the ethical and perhaps regulatory limitations on such technologies, and why should we protect privacy in the first place? In short, the right for a mental privacy or cognitive freedom that an individual has is something that many people hold dear, perhaps all of us. And this right is increasingly threatened by these and other technological means. I mentioned facial recognition, and there are others, and law scholars are bothered about this question, or these questions, and Shoshana Zuboff that was mentioned earlier. So absent of the right for cognitive privacy, and under the rule of dataism, again, Noah Harari's term, dictatorship of some sort is the probable governmental scenario. You can call it, and here is a pun, governmental, right? A government over the mental domain of the governed citizens. Legal systems, though, and democratic societies are rather based on judging people first and foremost according to their actions, rather than their intentions and subjective ponderings. Democracies generally hold a positive or neutral, fallibilistic vision of the human creature. Law, accordingly, is on such constellation orthopractic, rather than orthodoxic. More on these terms soon. In orthopraxy, people have the right for personal space anytime no other suspicion or presumption is visible or made concrete. The use of subjectivity invasive technological means, contrastingly, I think, centers on revealing hidden human intentions, feelings, and emotions as detectable in the brain, verbal and bodily expressions, and of course, it can be, right, analyzing written expressions too. So a society which will rely predominantly on subjectivity, invasive technological means would therefore increasingly become orthodox in the sense of detecting thoughts, namely one that examines and measures the proper or worthy intentions of its members, citizens, or alternatively aim to alert wrong or sinful intentions. Within such society, no human being would enjoy the presumption of innocence or privacy protection. So let us say a few words on the meaning of the term orthopraxy, really a few words because the time is short, which is much less common than its counterpart, orthodoxy. So whereas orthodoxy denotes true beliefs, orthopraxy is a pragmatic inclination toward deeds and the primacy of the performative and presumably also of the ethical. Orthopractic trajectories are arguably more considerative within early Judaism as compared with Christianity, for example, as various scholars acknowledged. On a deeper look, however, the crucial difference might not be between Judaism and Christianity per se, but between nominalist or radical idealist approaches and between pragmatist ones, across both religions and other religions, Abrahamic or other. William James, for example, a famous pragmatist, expressed his appreciation of the varied and the differentiated universe we happen to inhabit over an alternative world that could have been unified, fully transparent, and hyper-connected universe. That's in his Pragmatism book. The phenomenon of separateness then creates a space of privacy, which is, again, an interesting phenomenon, non-trivial at all. And thereby, there's a phenomenon, the space of privacy. Insofar as our present universe is in some way better than a fully unified and totally transparent one, transparent to everyone, privacy can be equally considered as valuable in some sense. So, very shortly, I want to argue that we have in the Bible, in the Hebrew Bible, an interesting lesson in terms of political theology. This is the famous legal scholar Carl Schmitt. And orthopraxy has a long career in religious traditions, as I just hinted, and hence can be analyzed in terms of political theology, which examines, following Carl Schmitt and others, the migration and transposition of religious ideas into modernity, and how modern images of the political are influenced and informed by pre-modern theological notions of authority. Political theology is vital for those who seek a nuanced discussion on privacy protection, because religious ideas have a profound influence on the very legitimacy granted to individuals and collectives who wish to live as persons who enjoy the right for privacy, right? It's a matter of expectations. This right, as we know after the 20th century, is threatened by ideologies which strive to melt or to merge individuals into totalitarian wholes. The footprints of these ideologies are still, I think, around. Most important for us here is Erich Fromm's treatment of the dialectics of the escape from freedom, and how the roots of this 20th century urge has its source in Martin Luther and Jan Calvin, this self-depreciating and self-surrendering of autonomy in face of a presumed divine, omnipotent and omniscient, omniscient, as Moise told me that I should pronounce it, thank you, Moise, is highly relevant for the idea of privacy, because the theological models involved have a bearing on the philosophical anthropology that brings about this escape from freedom. Do we have any standing in front of God or in front of the secular ruler, right? As we saw in the 20th century in many cases. So the question is there anything unique or important in Jewish political theology in this regard? I think the answer is affirmative. To address the phenomenon of cognitive invasiveness and the concerns described above about privacy protection, this section will briefly address orthopractic trajectories within normative-laden Jewish tradition in the scholarly lens, and then within halachic nomos and narrative, all very briefly, and then a bit, I'll elaborate for a minute or two on the concept of nisayon, divine trial, divine testing, in this regard. So this is an invitation to a more elaborated conversation, but I found much point in this book that we'll speak about now by Jacob Licht on nisayon. So Jewish normative tradition is especially aware of the need to protect individual privacy. Tzinat haprat, or the intimate domain of the individual or the family, is a basic good that halacha recognizes and aims to protect. This area was extensively surveyed and analyzed by Professor Nachum Rakover and recently by Ken Bamberger, Ariel Mays, Ariel Maise, and others. Here, at any event, I do not deal with various practical implications of this topic, but with a theological scheme which illuminates why privacy is so dear in Jewish tradition in the first place. The distinction between orthopraxy and orthodoxy has its basis, I think, in some sense, in Martin Buber's famous thesis concerning the difference between the Hebraic conception of trust, which is deed-oriented, emunah, as emun as trust, mutual trust, and between the one more prevalent, according to Buber, in the New Testament, which tends toward doxa, pistis, and propositional beliefs, la'amin she, rather than la'amin be, as in the Hebrew Bible. That's at least Buber thought. So just to demonstrate very briefly, Jewish orthopraxy, as manifesting the right for privacy by preferring deed over creed, has various expressions. Just to mention, besides the nisayon that we'll turn to soon, orthopraxy is expressed in halacha, in the Talmudic rule, which states that unspoken matters of the heart are not considered legally, dvarim shebalev and dvarim, which prioritizes, again, deeds over vague intentions. Secondly, the idea or norm of marit ayin, which centers on the social visibility of one's actions at the public sphere while bracketing her intentions. And here we make it to this thin, but I argue important book. In this section, I wish to propose that the early Jewish orthopractic inclination is encapsulated in the theological picturing of God in the Bible, especially in the Pentateuch, as non-omniscient. By that, I do not mean that God's knowledge is ontologically or straightforwardly deficient. Rather, that the fact that the Hebrew Bible chooses to portray God in such a way is not incidental and reveals something profound about the providential theology of the Hebrew Bible that may inform privacy protection at the present. My main reference for deliberating the biblical phenomenon of trial or testing, nisayon, is Jacob Licht's seminal work, Testing in the Hebrew Scriptures and in Post-Biblical Judaism, almost 50 years ago, 1973. This volume, thin but important, examines the biblical narratives of trial in cases where God tests humans and humans test God. I will briefly review Licht's main thesis without entering into the numerous instances of biblical testing that Licht considers, and then I will make a constructive claim on what its implications are for the context of AI and privacy protection. The biblical phenomenon of divine testing of an individual or a collective, the latter is more to found in Exodus, is diverse. In the prophets and in the wisdom literature, for example, God is usually portrayed as omniscient. But in the Pentateuch, God is described as often lacking some factual knowledge. Is it an embarrassing narratological fact or perhaps something important that המספר המקראי בקודש, Arav Berman used to say, wanted us to consider? So Licht suggests that given the acute theological problems stemming from the testing, which seemingly entail divine non-omniscience, past biblical Jews tended to transpose the testing from being an open question to God, and not only to humans, into a subjective human event or process which aims to forge the character of the tested individual. Concerning the theological meaning of the biblical testing, Licht says it implicates that, quote, God does not know how will the person eventually act. End of quote. To Licht's mind, this conception is unique to the Hebrew Bible and is distinct from other literatures, such as Greek tragedy, in which the hero is doomed to failure, and this failure is known to the gods in advance, of course. So, in the Hebrew Bible, says Licht, you have this sentence, I think, everything depends on the deeds of the person. My translation, I hope it's okay, who is treated strictly in the moral and religious domain due to her, it was more gender inclusive, capacity to act according to her or his determination at any time it is up to them. And the righteousness of the person is never dependent upon mere characters, dispositions, and emotions, but by deed alone. You can hear perhaps an interesting critique of Luther, which was previously mentioned. Licht farther contends that so rooted in the Hebrew Bible is a feeling that the human being controls their actions, is to do justice or evil, that Scripture does not hesitate to assert that God thyself needs a testing in order to know what the human person will do. And here I come to the conclusion, or at least approach it. So against the prevalent Schmittian, Carl Schmitt's assumption that human governors should strive to achieve maximal godlike omniscient knowledge or omniscience, it is maybe the case that the political theology of the Hebrew Bible, or minimally the Pentateuch, proposes a radical lesson that divine government can be understood as a benevolent respect for human privacy and freedom of the will, right? They come together. Since the future is open, yet to be determined, you can connect it to Yasher if you want, following Rabbi Zaks. The private cognitive realm is also in some way just indeterminate. So to make a conclusion, while alluding to Shlomo Tanai's wonderful poem, Lehashir, the above excursus reveals that in the Hebrew Bible we find a non-omniscient image of God which respects human privacy. This orthopractic worldview, I speculate, served as a basis for the Jewish or Hebraic notion of autonomy, which views the human creature as capable partner rather than mere subject or slave. And it may suggest robust moral lessons for a democratic privacy protection in our post-secular age. Is there a way to mediate between the attempt to, and this is the last paragraph, the short one, is there a way to mediate between the attempt to maximize human knowledge and data collection? Again, our legitimate urge of hadata, we want to know more, to put it objectively, and between the attempt to protect human privacy, intimacy as a primary human good. The biblical concept of testing and Jewish orthopraxy more broadly may serve as an important road sign against the temptation to unfold the human person entirely. Lifros et ha'adam ad tom, in Tanai's wonderful words. And the question is whether we ultimately want to live in a orthodoxic society or orthopractic, and I think democracies are again initially orthopractic. So thank you.